I can't answer that intelligently. I think Bryan took a very long train campaign trip, but whether it was longer than that or not, I don't know.
You were talking earlier about, well, for instance, Jefferson and campaigning. I wonder if you'd tell us, sir, again, as if you were telling an audience or a young student, how Thomas Jefferson went about campaigning for the presidency.
Thomas Jefferson was an early advocate of the common everyday people, and his campaign was carried on by correspondence. He had committees of correspondence all over the 13 colonies and was working as well as he could to prevent the special privileged people from taking over the government of the United States. He didn't do much traveling on that first campaign of his, but he really did convert the people to the idea that the government was theirs and not the government of the special privileged people.
I wonder if you could tell us, sir, how someone like Abraham Lincoln campaigned, or did he campaign?
Yes, he campaigned. He rode on the train, went around over the part of the country that he was sure he could carry. And he made quite a campaign. But the country at that time was divided. And his election was due to the fact that those states who wanted to maintain the Union stayed with him, and the others did not, although I'm of the opinion that if the Democratic Party hadn't been split up into 3 sections, that he would not have been elected. He was elected on minority vote.
In her book, Miss Margaret Truman's Souvenir, she says, sir, of the 1948 campaign, she puts it much better than this, but essentially this, my father and I didn't even have to talk about whether I was going on the campaign train or not. We have that very special kind of understanding that I knew I was going to go. Would you tell us about that, sir? Not as an answer to a question, but about Miss Margaret and the 1948
Margaret
campaign.
is my only child, and she knew very well in 1948 that she and her mother would have to go with the old man on the campaign, and she was ready, and she went. She made it wonderful.
She surely did. How did Mrs. Truman feel about going on the campaign? Did she enjoy campaigning?
Oh, she had a good time, and she wanted to see the old man elected.
Right. I wonder, sir, if you could go back a little. One time you and I were talking, and you were telling me about Washington trying to convince the people of his time that they couldn't believe what they read in the papers. And I wonder, sir, if you could tell me this, well, the whole story, more or less, how he got from place to place, why he decided to go from place to place, the kind of speeches he made, why he felt it was necessary, and so on. Now, there's only one thing. When you were talking about Lincoln a moment ago, you didn't mention his name. So in this case, when you tell me about George Washington...
well, George Washington was, of course, one of the great of the presidential line. And he was interested in establishing a government. And he had to do some traveling around in order to do it. He went by stagecoach and horseback. And when he was finished with the problem which he had in view, he had accomplished the purpose of setting up a government, which very few men could have done. And that's the reason he's one of the great presidents, because he succeeded in inaugurating a government, a free government of the United States under the Constitution, which he had helped to write. He'd been president of the Constitutional Convention.
I wonder, sir, if you could tell us, skipping way ahead now, in 1948, the Republicans met in Philadelphia also, a little while before. I wonder if you could tell us, sir, whether you looked, I think that was the first convention that was on television. I wonder if you watched it and what your reaction was.
Oh, yes. I was in the White House at the time, and I didn't have anything else to do, so I sat and watched it. And I watched all the mistakes they made and took advantage of them, and it worked.
I wonder, sir, if you could, you said it, if you could say, I watched the Republican convention.
Well, I did. I watched the Republican convention, and it was a most interesting program. And that's when I put them on the spot about calling a special session and making them carry out their program as they set it out in their platform.
There was a lady, sir, who somewhat later became our ambassador, I believe, to Italy, who made a speech at that Republican convention. I wonder, did you hear that lady's speech?
No, I didn't, and I'm glad I didn't.
You don't think much of her oratorical?
Oh, well, she was talking politically and in a partisan manner, and there wasn't any use in my listening to that sort of a speech and then getting stirred up about it because it didn't mean anything because she didn't win.
I wonder, sir, in taking all the time you'd like, if you could tell us about how you felt about the press in 1948. Not only how you felt, but how you felt the campaign was covered. How you felt about the editorials, about how the percentage of newspapers against you as against the percentage that was for you. Just in general, anything you'd like to say.
Well, you don't have, about the press in 1948, you don't have to worry about the percentage that were for me. It wasn't there. If there was 1%, it was great. I doubt if there was that much. And it didn't make any serious difference because I was out seeing the people and telling them exactly what I stood for, and it didn't make any difference what the press stood for because everybody understood that the press is and always has been for special privilege. And the common everyday man doesn't have anybody as his lobbyist but the president in the White House, and he's got to be for him if he's going to do him any good.
I wonder, sir, if there have been other examples in presidential campaigns when the press has been very heavily weighted against a candidate and he's won nevertheless.
Oh, yes, Grover Cleveland in 1884 and 1892, that is the case.
When you say that was the case, you mean that the press was against him?
I mean the press was trying to get the other fellow elected.
How about, sir, you have someplace mentioned, perhaps in the memoirs, that when Andrew Jackson was running for office, the press was largely against him. Is that the case?
Yes, that's true. That's true. The press was, I might say, nearly 100% against Andrew Jackson. And he didn't care. He took the country anyway and then told them where to get off.
Of course, the most famous thing, I suppose, about 1948 was the incredible mistake that the pollsters made. Tell us about pollsters. How do you feel about pollsters?
Well, pollsters are, I guess, a necessity for business purposes. But when it comes to politics, I think they make a great many mistakes. And the pollsters in 1948 made up their minds, and I can tell you, I can give you a shining example of how they make up their minds, that there wasn't a chance for the man in the White House to be reelected. And I can give you a shining example of the managing editor of the New York Times, who was in Rome about the 9th of September, and who informed the Pope that the president of the occupant of the White House hadn't a chance to be reelected. Well, along in November, after the election was over, the same fellow was in the Pope's place in the Vatican, and the Pope asked him how that came about. Well, he said that the reason that came about was that instead of going back to the towns where I had been on that famous train, that they had polled themselves after the thing was over, the newspaper men in the town, and of course they told the pollsters what they wanted to hear, that there wasn't a chance of my being reelected. And that was the excuse he made to the Pope. And when he came to see me after that, I reminded him of the fact, and he told me the same thing. He said, well, we just polled ourselves instead of trying to find out how the people felt.